In the early morning, the sunlight gently bathed the quiet Bell Lake community. The streets were lined with neatly maintained green spaces, the air fresh and crisp, while birds chirped in every corner of the neighborhood. This was an affluent area where every house exuded luxury and understated elegance. The residents were mostly successful professionals and harmonious families. Every morning they hurried off to the gym, the office, or their children's school, as if life followed a predictable routine. However, today, everything was shattered. Suddenly, the tranquility of Bell Lake was interrupted by the blaring sirens of police cars. A team of heavily armed officers quickly surrounded one of the houses, setting up a barricade around the property. Neighbors peeked through their windows, whispering about what had happened. Soon, news spread that a murder had occurred here. The police confirmed that the crime scene was the home of a woman named Emma Wilson. What shocked the community was not just her death, but the brutal nature of it. The seemingly mild-mannered housewife had been savagely murdered, and the scene was bloodied. In the days to come, more secrets would unravel, and this case would forever alter the lives of those involved. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as we continue to explore this shocking case. Chris Wilson and Emma Wilson, this couple, are the celebrities of the Bell Lake community, the perfect couple in the eyes of outsiders. Every time they appear at social events, they attract countless envious glances. Their marriage is like a carefully choreographed dance, precise and in perfect harmony. Chris is a successful investment banker, always able to make key decisions under pressure, earning the respect of his bosses and peers. Emma, on the other hand, is a real estate mogul, rising rapidly to the top of the industry with her sharp intelligence and excellent interpersonal skills. She can easily close multi-million-dollar property deals and maintain her high-end image through a well-curated social circle. They live in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods of Bell Lake, in a spacious, modern-style villa. Every detail of the villa reflects their status and taste. Marble floors, luxurious chandeliers, a large backyard with a private pool, and that shiny high-end sports car. Everything about their home screams success, as though everything is meticulously designed to maintain the perfect image in the eyes of the public. People around them often refer to them as the model couple, who have achieved both career and family success. Every year they host a few grand parties, inviting friends and business partners to join in. The atmosphere at these events is always full of smiles and applause, and very few know that every detail behind it is carefully planned to meet external expectations. At every gathering, Emma wears designer outfits, and Chris dons a well-tailored suit, always accessorized with a diamond-studded watch. There are virtually no doubts about their marriage in the public eye, and everyone believes they are a couple with a harmonious and fulfilling relationship. However, the lavishness and brilliance on the surface conceal an unspeakable truth behind their lives. While both of them have achieved great success in their careers, their marriage had quietly begun to crack over time. Chris's demanding job often consumes most of his time and energy, leaving little room for family or his wife. Emma, though outwardly gentle and devoted, began to feel an increasing sense of emptiness and loneliness. To fill this void, she threw herself even more into her work, expanding her influence and business empire. The success and brilliance of her career only highlighted her growing neglect of their relationship. Chris's younger brother Leon is a young musician, full of dreams and a free-spirited attitude toward life. Unlike Chris, who is steady and practical, Leon always seems a bit carefree and unconventional. He dresses casually, with slightly messy hair, exuding an unmistakable artistic vibe. Whether it's his impromptu guitar playing or his wild creative inspiration, everything about him shows his unique approach to life. Unlike Chris, who chases wealth and fame, Leon cares more about inner freedom and the pursuit of his soul. This difference in lifestyle often created a subtle dynamic between the two brothers. Whenever Leon comes to Bell Lake, he always makes a point to visit Chris's house. Initially, his stays were brief, maybe only a few days or a week, but over time, his visits became more frequent. Chris never minded his brother's presence, and even felt that these energetic moments added life to his otherwise mundane routine. Although Leon's lifestyle was very different from his own, Chris never interfered, and always welcomed him with a tolerant attitude. However, things were not as simple as they seemed. Emma, Chris's wife, didn't seem to mind Leon's visits and, in fact, appeared even more enthusiastic than Chris. At first, this enthusiasm was simply due to her admiration for Leon's artistic talents. After all, Leon's musical abilities and unique charm were hard for anyone to ignore. Emma often told Chris that she found Leon's effortless charisma refreshing, especially compared to the more business-focused world that Chris was part of. As time passed, Emma and Leon's relationship became more and more complicated. Their interactions were no longer just casual discussions about music or life's trivial matters. Instead, they began to carry a deeper emotional undertone. Every time Chris was busy with work or away on a business trip, Leon became an important part of Emma's life. They were no longer just friends. There was an unspoken connection between them, a subtle tension that both of them felt. Emma could always sense that in Leon's eyes there was more than just admiration. There was an undeniable longing. Each time their gazes met, it seemed like they were silently conveying some unspoken emotion. At first, Emma tried to ignore this change. She convinced herself that her relationship with Leon was still just a friendship, that they were only getting closer because they shared common interests. But slowly she began to realize that her feelings were no longer as simple as they once had been. Every time she was with Leon, she felt a rapid heartbeat and an undeniable attraction. Leon's presence seemed to be a burst of color in her otherwise dull life, and his free-spirited, unconventional charm often made her forget the responsibilities and obligations of being a wife. They started meeting secretly whenever Chris wasn't around. At first, it was just simple get-togethers, a coffee, a dinner, or even just a walk in the nearby park. However, as they spent more time together, their relationship grew increasingly ambiguous. Leon began to lightly touch Emma's arm, and Emma deliberately avoided Chris's gaze, choosing to interact with Leon in private. Every meeting was laced with an excitement that was both suppressed and dangerously thrilling. They both knew this was a secret, one that couldn't be revealed, but every time they were together, it felt like a forbidden game they couldn't stop playing. However, the forbidden attraction was exactly what kept them trapped in this dangerous dance. Each meeting was a challenge to their reason, a betrayal of their marriage and family. Yet they seemed unable to stop down this path. Emma knew she shouldn't feel this way, and Leon understood that he shouldn't cross that line. But every time they touched, the warnings in their minds seemed to vanish, leaving only a burning passion and uncontrollable desire. They started sharing not only their personal thoughts, but also the emotions they couldn't express in words. As time passed, Chris began to feel an inexplicable sense of unease. His wife, Emma, who had once been vibrant and full of energy, seemed to have changed in ways he could no longer ignore. She had become increasingly mysterious, often distant and even cold. The woman who used to be so caring and affectionate had seemingly become lost in her own world, no longer as concerned about Chris or their life together. The most troubling thing to Chris was Emma's increasing frequency of working late. He knew she was a driven real estate agent, but he had never seen her work such long hours before. Every time she told him she was working late, Chris couldn't help but ask himself, "Is work really that busy?" She would come home later and later, often not until deep into the night, or even the early hours of the morning. And when she did return, she would hurry to her room as if there were something waiting for her. The more he observed her, the more Chris's doubts grew. In addition to this, Chris also noticed that Emma had become very secretive about her phone. She seemed to be constantly preoccupied with it and would always lock the screen or change the subject whenever Chris got too close. What worried him even more was that recently Emma's phone would often receive messages from unknown numbers. Although she would always brush it off with a smile and quickly delete them, Chris's intuition told him that these messages were not simply work-related. Every time she checked her phone, there was a subtle expression on her face, almost as if she were hiding something. Chris could no longer ignore the changes in his wife. He began to suspect that he might have been deceived all along. As a man who had spent years navigating the corporate world, Chris was well acquainted with the signs of change, and he knew that when his gut told him something was off, it was time to act. He decided to get to the bottom of it. Chris hired a private detective named Jack. Jack was an experienced investigator who had worked on numerous cases. Chris told him all his suspicions and details, instructing him to secretly follow Emma, especially her interactions with Leon. Though his heart was full of doubt and pain, Chris knew that the only way to rid himself of the anxiety and uncertainty was to uncover the truth. A few days later, Chris received a phone call from the private investigator, Jack, his voice betraying a subtle seriousness. "Chris, the investigation has yielded results. I've gathered some photos and records, and I'll personally deliver them to you tonight." Chris's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation swirling within him. He knew that this moment had finally come, and the truth was about to be uncovered. But instead of the rush of emotions he might have expected, he felt an odd sense of calm, as though he had already anticipated the inevitable outcome. That evening, as agreed, Jack handed Chris a folder. When Chris opened it, the first thing he saw was several photos. In one, Emma and Leon were sitting intimately at a high-end restaurant, completely absorbed in each other, their eyes filled with an unspoken connection. They hadn't tried to hide from the camera. In fact, they seemed more relaxed and carefree, as though the world around them no longer mattered. The next few photos showed them standing together in front of a hotel, their closeness undeniable, though the background was blurry. But it was clear that their bond was much more than just a fleeting moment. Chris's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the photos, each one like a sharp knife, piercing through the reality he had once believed in. Then he flipped over to another page, which contained text message exchanges between Emma and Leon. Chris's eyes lingered on a few lines. "I'll miss you when you're not here tonight. Are you there yet? I can't wait to see you." And a few others that were more intimate. While the words themselves weren't overtly explicit, the undertones of their emotions and connection were unmistakable. These messages were like an unforgiving verdict, shattering any last hope Chris had clung to. The images and words in front of him seemed to unravel everything he had once held dear, memories of laughter, warm embraces, and dreams of a future together. Now all of it seemed to collapse before his eyes. Rage quickly spread through Chris, the feeling of betrayal flooding his heart like a tidal wave, consuming every shred of his rationality. He was angry at Emma, angry at Leon, angry at himself for being so blind. But amidst the anger, Chris managed to maintain a certain level of composure. He knew that rage and impulsivity wouldn't solve anything. Only a well-thought-out plan for revenge could ensure that everything would be set right. After Chris learned the truth that night, he began to meticulously plan his revenge. He didn't release his anger immediately. Instead, he buried all his emotions deep inside, replacing impulsiveness with cold logic and reason. He wanted Leon to pay the price for everything, but it had to look like an uncontrollable accident. Chris started by researching criminal psychology and real cases. He read extensively about murders and how to fake crime scenes, even purchasing some related crime analysis books online. He carefully analyzed the mistakes made in each case, learning from them to ensure his plan would be flawless. A few days later, Chris began collecting the items needed to execute his plan. He found a razor in Leon's room, carefully wrapped it in a napkin. He knew the razor might have Leon's fingerprints on it, even traces of blood, which would serve as crucial forged evidence. Then, he went to Leon's wardrobe and found a leather jacket that Leon often wore. He quietly took it and hid it in the corner of his garage. Next, Chris decided to forge evidence in his own garage. He used a razor blade he had prepared earlier to gently cut his own arm, letting a few drops of blood fall. He smeared the blood on Leon's jacket and the razor. At the same time, he carefully placed other items related to Leon around the house to direct suspicion toward him. As for the timing of the crime, Chris thought it through carefully. He realized that one day in August would coincide with the day Leon had finished his concert tour and would be resting. Chris decided to carry out the plan that evening because Leon, tired from the tour, would have no time to defend himself. On the night of August 9th, the weather was somewhat oppressive, with the air thickening with the impending threat of rain. Chris stood by the window in his study, watching the darkening sky. He knew tonight was the moment he had been waiting for. His revenge plan was almost complete, and everything hinged on this final step. That evening, Emma, as usual, went about her day, preparing dinner and chatting with Chris about trivial matters. Chris appeared more patient than usual, speaking softly, but inside, he was already making the final preparations for what was about to unfold. After dinner, he casually continued the conversation with Emma until she finished a glass of homemade wine. It was a glass of wine laced with a tranquilizer. Chris had carefully mixed the drug into the wine, and Emma's consciousness slowly began to fade as the alcohol and sedative took effect. In less than half an hour, Emma had passed out. Her usually energetic body lay limply on the couch. Chris gently held her up, whispering, "I'm sorry, Emma, but this has to end." Once he confirmed that Emma was completely unconscious, Chris carefully moved her to the bedroom and laid her on the bed. He covered her with a blanket, making sure she appeared to be peacefully asleep. At that moment, he had completed the most crucial part of the plan, creating the perfect murder scene. Chris first retrieved Leon's jacket from the garage and quietly placed it by the bed. He carefully smeared blood from his own hands onto the jacket and then used Leon's razor to make a few shallow cuts on the bedsheets, leaving traces of blood. Next, he took Leon's wallet from the garage and placed it on the bedside table, as though there had been a violent argument between them, with Leon hastily leaving in the aftermath, leaving behind the evidence. But that was not all. Chris then took the special knife from his storage cabinet, the one he had chosen after researching various murder cases. It was the perfect weapon for the job, capable of delivering a fatal blow without leaving obvious marks. Chris placed the knife in Emma's hand, making it look as if she had grabbed it during a final struggle, leaving a silent sign of resistance. Once everything was in place, Chris stood at the door of the bedroom and took a deep breath. He knew that the next step would be the most critical part of the entire plan. He picked up his phone and dialed the emergency number. "Police? I found my wife dead. She looks like she's been murdered." His voice was frantic, trembling with shock, like a distressed husband. After hanging up, Chris left the bedroom and waited in the living room for the police to arrive. Upon receiving the call, the police quickly rushed to the scene and began their initial investigation. After examining the room, they soon noticed the unusual circumstances surrounding the death. Emma's cause of death appeared to be the result of a violent argument gone wrong, and the evidence left behind, Leon's jacket, wallet, razor, and bloodstains, immediately cast suspicion on Leon. On the morning of August 10th, Leon had just woken up from a night's sleep. His phone had a few unread messages, all casual greetings from friends. The content was light-hearted and ordinary. However, as he walked out of his bedroom, he was met by a group of uniformed police officers. "Leon Harris, you are under arrest for the murder of Emma Harris. Please come with us." One of the officers spoke sternly. Leon froze, unable to comprehend what was happening. His mind was still foggy from the exhaustion of last night's performance. What he heard now wasn't music, but the sound of police officers. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he thought he was dreaming. "What are you talking about? I didn't do anything," Leon responded urgently, unable to understand what was going on. He tried to pull away from the officers but was forcefully taken into the police car. Upon arriving at the station, Leon was led into an interrogation room where the evidence against him was laid out. Emma's clothes, bloodstains, and even some of his personal belongings. The police matched his clothing, razor, and bloodstains, then showed him surveillance footage from the bedroom, which clearly showed his presence in Emma's house. All of this seemed irrefutable, leaving no space for defense. "How do you explain all of this evidence?" the officer asked. Leon's mind was in a whirlwind. The items did belong to him, but he had no memory of being involved in any of the events that night. Despite his vehement denials and attempts to explain himself, every piece of evidence seemed to pin him down as if he were sinking deeper into an inescapable abyss. The investigation into the case quickly progressed in the first few days, with the police thoroughly analyzing Emma's death. As Leon remained in custody, more and more suspicious details began to surface, and Chris's unusually calm demeanor started to attract the attention of the lead detective, Joseph Reynolds. As a husband, Chris seemed too composed, which struck the investigator as odd. Despite Chris repeatedly emphasizing the grief of losing his wife during questioning, his almost unnervingly calm demeanor raised suspicions in Detective Reynolds. When responding to questions, Chris was notably succinct and lacked any emotional fluctuations. In contrast, the pain of losing a loved one often causes people to reveal some form of emotion, yet Chris showed none. As the investigation deepened, the police began a more detailed background check on Chris, especially focusing on his relationship with Emma and her behavior in the days leading up to her death. By examining Chris's phone records and internet history, the police uncovered some unsettling clues. A week before Emma's death, Chris had repeatedly searched for terms like perfect murder. Most alarmingly, he had read articles on how to create an untraceable crime scene and even looked into methods for using certain lethal drugs. These search records were highly suspicious in the context of the investigation. Considering that Chris was an investment banker with a high IQ and extensive business experience, the idea that he might have researched murder methods was both surprising and troubling. This detail made Detective Reynolds increasingly suspicious. Was Chris truly just an innocent husband, or was there a more complicated motive behind the scenes? The police expanded their investigation into Chris, looking into his relationship with Leon, his family's financial situation, and potential issues within his marriage. They also began examining Chris's movements and timelines, attempting to find an alibi. The police gradually pieced together Chris's conspiracy. He didn't just plan Emma's death in every detail, but intentionally involved Leon to make him the sole suspect. Chris used Leon's belongings and blood to stage the scene, ensuring that Leon would be implicated. Chris's calmness and precision nearly allowed him to escape justice, but he hadn't anticipated that he would leave traces at every turn. As more evidence came to light, Chris's crime became undeniable. Faced with questioning from the police, he finally cracked and confessed to murdering his wife. He hung his head, admitting to every detail, revealing how he meticulously designed and executed the plan. With mounting evidence and intense interrogation, Chris could no longer hide his actions and ultimately confessed. Chris's trial became a media sensation, drawing widespread attention and becoming the focus of national news. From the very beginning, all eyes were on the unraveling of what appeared to be a perfect family. The death of Emma and Chris's crime not only shocked the public, but also made everyone who had interacted with them feel cold and uneasy. During the trial, Chris's calm demeanor continued to unsettle everyone, and each member of the jury was left pondering how this man, once a loving husband, could transform into a cold-blooded murderer. In the end, the court delivered its verdict. Chris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The jury concluded that all the evidence pointed to Chris as the mastermind behind Emma's murder, a crime he meticulously planned and executed, not only to free himself, but also to frame his brother, Leon, for the crime. After the verdict was read, Chris said nothing. He maintained his usual composure, as though none of it had anything to do with him. However, the real tragedy was not just about Chris. Leon, the young musician who had been wrongfully accused of his wife's murder, though ultimately proven innocent, endured a psychological torment that the public could never fully comprehend. Throughout the entire trial, he had grappled with his own pain, but even after the verdict, the emotional scars remained. On the final day of the trial, Leon stood outside the courtroom, quietly staring into the distance. Despite being cleared of all charges, he could not escape the deep sense of betrayal that weighed on him. During the long period of his wrongful imprisonment, Leon often replayed his relationship with Emma in his mind. He questioned whether it had ever been truly pure. The woman who had once shown him so much affection and care had, in the end, become the one who plunged him into this abyss of betrayal. Even though Emma's death had cleared his name, it had stolen away all the good memories he had of her. He lost not only his family and love, but also his trust in people. Standing outside the courtroom, Leon let out a long, heavy sigh. His eyes were filled with weariness and helplessness, as though the pain within him would never heal. Despite being exonerated, the shadow of betrayal still haunted him. He had not only lost his name and reputation, but also the belief he had once held in the beauty of life. The conclusion of this story is not a perfect victory, nor a clear resolution. Leon's heart remained tormented, and he could never fully escape the memories of the betrayal and conspiracy that had entangled him. Even though he had survived this bloody ordeal, life could never return to what it had once been. As he lingered outside the courthouse, he was still trapped in the pain and confusion, and the profound wounds of betrayal would never heal.